Awesome. All right. So I'm just excited to have an intro now. Big thanks to Guille over at Chromatic for doing that for us. He was going to be our guest last week, but unfortunately I got the stomach flu. So he'll be joining us next week. But welcome to the Manual Save podcast. My name's John Laster, joined by Justin Connors, creative director of 8 Prime Esports, and Amanda Farough. And you are here with Virtual Economy.
I am.
So can you tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about your background?
Sure. So Virtual Economy is, our tagline is the business of games for the rest of us. So we try to make the business of video games a lot more accessible than it tends to be, because it's convoluted and it moves really fast. And so we break it down. We don't just report on the news and just tell people to form their own opinions. We're like, no, this is what it means in context. And this is how we understand things like, oh, I don't know, stock shorting.
Yeah, I was going to say, I have to imagine that this week has been abnormally crazy for you guys.
Tiny bit.
Just
our show notes are bananas right now. They are just otherworldly.
Well, I think everybody is trying to find bananas right now, because that's always the analogy I keep seeing used, is that, you know, the snakes borrowed the bananas and then the monkeys all claimed them back. It's probably the easiest way to explain it, other than just we're playing a giant game of musical chairs and there's not enough chairs, you know?
Definitely not enough chairs. Everyone should have more chairs.
Yeah.
And in terms of my background, I come from a computer science background, so that's what my education is in. I spent a number of years in web design and web development and had my own business for 6.5 years. I was 23 when I started it, and I was like, hey, it's either this or I go work at McDonald's. So I started a business. Because I was really upset and fed up with software development, because it was a boys' game and I wasn't interested in playing it anymore. So after that, I sold my client list and I said, all right, I'm done. I've been in web for a long time. I was 30 when I stopped making websites and web apps. And I had been doing it for 15 years at that point. So I'd been in web for 15 years.
Yeah.
So I was like, I'm done. I'm tired. And I was a mom. So, I had two kids. So I was like, oh, what can I do? So I decided to become a writer, which is what I guess normal people, I don't think that's normal, but that's what I did. And no, normal people don't just be like, hey, how about we leave the lucrative stuff behind and go be a creative for a living? How does that sound? So I did that.
I can relate a little bit, except I probably went the other direction in the sense of I started doing content creation around 15. I was writing about games just because there were forums and you could do that back then. And then someone reached out and was like, hey, you know how to string words well together. And I'm like, okay, here's a game, review it. And I'm like, okay. And then they're like, I don't really have to edit you. Do you want to edit other people for me? I'm like, okay. And then they're like, we'll pay you. Okay. And it just kept kind of scaling up like that. And I got really lucky.
I spent 7 years toiling away in this industry as being my side hustle. And then when I decided to go full time, then I was like, I wonder if they'll pay me. Will they pay me? Turns out they'll pay me.
Yeah. It was a nice gig, especially when I was in college. And then when I graduated, I was still kind of dabbling around in the space. Kind of doing a little bit of consulting on the side, which is where I can definitely resonate with your background a little bit as well. Kind of floating in that world between the press and, the actual business side.
Yeah.
And then eventually I was just like, I like content creation. I'll do it for fun when it comes to something like this, because it still fits within my job, but I'm going to go stick with being an attorney instead of, toiling away and writing and streaming.
Yeah. Well, and that's totally fair. And look, in 2017, I started working at Mic.com before the big pivot to video. And that was heartbreaking. The pivot to video and the utter scam that Facebook pulled in tanking so many good outlets, and ripping my team away from me. They were like my family. And that was really hard, but I came back in 2018, and then I started at Game Daily as the managing editor, and I moved up and then I took over. But you know what? The problem is that I'm so ambitious and I just want to do everything, and I want to do everything to the highest possible extent that I can. Turns out that indie media, not built for that.
Yeah.
Not built for my ambition.
I think that's probably one of my biggest shortcomings when it comes to content to begin with, is I don't really like doing something if I don't feel like it's being put out at a decent level.
Yeah.
So I end up not doing a lot of things that I want to do. I mean, even just with some of the things that Justin and I have been talking about to promote this podcast, we're still waiting on getting them up because we've gone through so many iterations of like fixing them, you know.
Listen, at some point you just got to ship it.
100%.
Yeah, that's the truth.
That's literally the truth when it comes to almost everything. Is there's a point where perfection becomes your enemy, and you've got to just push toward more of like a minimal viable product, especially when there's so much noise you have to break through anyway.
Yeah.
That like
it's true.
you need more at bats. That's really what it is. It doesn't matter if you have the perfect content if no one sees it.
Exactly.
You've got to get enough at bats at the plate to have something catch attention.
Yes.
You also have to kind of find your own. A lot of people will start off making content they've seen already. And so it's hard. That's where the identity is hard to be, because you're kind of making things like, I want to be like that person. So you make content like that. And not until you do enough swings, you start to become your own content, because you're usually at the beginning just making content other people have done already.
Sure. Yep. It's totally true.
Yep.
I mean, at the very beginning of all of this, like when I started in 2010 over at Gaming Angels, I was just kind of doing a lot of this stuff that I'd already seen, and I hadn't figured out what kind of a writer I wanted to be yet. I mean, I've been a writer my whole life. I mean, I don't have like a bajillion writing books over here as a result of me not being like a for realsies writer. But when I was trying to find my voice as a critic, when I was trying to find my voice as a reporter, I was just kind of emulating what everyone else did. And when I finally got to Mike.com, I felt like I could develop my own voice and develop my own style as a reporter. And Game Daily just really cemented that. A lot of the reporting I did at Game Daily was just, it was business with heart. And that's what we do over at Virtual Economy and at F Squared, which is the consulting firm that my partner Mike and I run.
Awesome. Yeah. Speaking of books, the one book I do have on my desk, which I can't grab right now because I have 3 million things of baseball cards, is Mike's.
Yeah.
So I have it up there, and I've let that thing be borrowed so many times now over at my co-working space, because it does have
so
lot of great information in it.
Yeah, it's so good. I remember when he was writing it, and I was just sitting there going like, I'm sorry, you're talking to whom today? That's so exciting. Awesome. I will yell about those books, and like, yeah, Mike's my partner, but regardless, the books, the Game Dev Business Handbook and the Game Dev Budgeting Handbook are both amazing. And they're so helpful for indie studios. And quite frankly, they're really helpful for anyone who's working in creative at all.
Where can you get those? Are they on like Amazon?
They're on Amazon, and you can also go to I think gamedevbizbook.com to go and pick up a copy.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Everyone that cares about video games should absolutely go and pick up a copy of that book. At least the Game Dev Biz book.
Sold.
Yes. Love it. Mike's going to be so happy with me.
You did a great job already.
I did it good.
Yeah.
But speaking on just kind of like finding your voice and creating some original content that hasn't been done out there, I think you guys have done a good job of that with Virtual Economy. So like, let's jump back into that a little bit and kind of talk about some of the things you guys kind of walk through on a weekly basis. Because I know, at least from my perspective, and I've told Mike this before, you guys probably talk about more legal stuff than I've seen on just about any other podcast. There was one week in particular, I think you had like 5 or 6.
Yeah, we had so many legal stories. I remember that episode too. Mike looks at me and he's like, I need you to sanity check me on this. Do you think it's a good idea that we talk about 6 different legal stories? And I'm like, well, I'm ready to roll up my sleeves if you are. The whole ethos behind Virtual Economy has really been, listen, we don't want to sit around and like give hot takes and, just give our opinions on everything. We just want to break it down. And we try to cover everything from legal to mergers and acquisitions, into finance. It's finance season right now because it's quarterly financials are coming out. So, expect more of that on Virtual Economy. I'm going to have lots of financial stuff to say. But on a weekly basis, Mike's the guy that puts together our show notes, and then we go over it before we record. But what we really care about is just making it as accessible as possible. And part of that is making it fun. So when we talk about legal stuff, if I don't know it, because I'm Canadian, right? So like American law is weird to me. As a citizen of the Commonwealth, everything is very strange in this country. I like my adopted country, but it is weird. So I will just ask Mike. I will just interview Mike more often than not, even if I go over those notes and I'm like, I could totally talk about this. Nah, I just turn it into an interview and I get him to share his knowledge. The man should have been a damn lawyer. He would have been really good at it. I'm not detail oriented enough to be a lawyer. I could just write law things, maybe.
So just looking at what's going on in the world this week in particular, I'll be honest, when we set up this podcast, I was not expecting this to be a thing this week in particular. So we just kind of lucked out that we have somebody who likes to talk about financials and stocks and business within games. And
it's true.
Well, there's this stock called GameStop. And do you want to explain to people what's going on right now if they
oh my gosh
don't have a clue?
Okay, so I'm not going to go into it as deeply as Mike would, because Mike has a really great grasp of the American financial system in a way that I don't, because the Toronto Stock Exchange works a little bit differently. So, and the Canadian stock market is regulated very, very differently than the American stock market, let me tell you. So the timeline of things is like, we found out in October when GameStop started getting its big lift. When Microsoft was like, hey guys, we should partner up. You should use Surface tablets in all of your stores, and we're going to help you with your point of sale systems too. And everyone's like, Microsoft and GameStop? That's exciting. Here, have more money. We're going to invest more. And so the stock started rising. But the problem is that the float for GameStop, which is like the amount of available shares for the public, was sitting at 138%. So we had to have a conversation with somebody who works in finance about this. And as it turns out, what ends up happening with the stock shorting is that the people that actually own the stocks end up leasing them out to these stock shorters. And then the stock shorters end up selling them into the marketplace again. So they get like double counted. Because the system's broken. So what's happening right now with this short squeeze is that everyone's like, oh, hey, those stock shorters though, right? And so everyone has just been so before we get into that, the stock shorters are betting against the company's long-term health. That's kind of what they're doing. They're betting against GameStop. They're betting against AMC, against BlackBerry, against all of these companies that have really become like the quote unquote meme stocks essentially on Reddit. And the stock shorters want them to fail, because if they fail, they make a lot of money. And if they end up climbing up in popularity and the stock price rises and whatever the value rises, they lose a lot of money. And so a lot of these stock shorting hedge funds have been losing a ton of money. Now, listen, there's no love lost here for hedge funds. Like those guys can be yeeted into the sun and I'd be pretty okay with that. They really could be. I would not miss that at all. So anyway, that's how we ended up in this position where the higher the price of the stock goes, the worse it is for the stock shorters. But it's also kind of throwing the rest of the stock market into this weird ripple state, because people even with like relatively safe mutual funds are starting to see declines in their portfolios. Not like really big declines. They're marginal, like under 5%. But still, it's enough to give you pause and be like, oh, wow, this is really broken.
Yeah, that's what's been kind of the most interesting thing to me, is to just see how easy it's been for kind of this decentralized, for lack of a better word, mob in a lot of ways off of Reddit to just kind of come in and affect things, in
Yeah.
a way that, these hedge funds who've been selling short on stuff for forever,
For
it's not like
so
it's a
many
new
years,
practice.
abusing the system. That's
Yeah.
that's an abuse of the system.
They've basically been playing their own game with their own rules and kind of just making money. Well,
Yep.
somebody else came and sat down in that game of musical chairs and started taking chairs.
Yep.
And they're a little like, you can't do that. You're not
That's
supposed
not
to
allowed.
be here, And it's been really crazy to watch. And while I'll be honest, I'm not trying to give anyone here stock advice or financial advice or anything related to that.
This is not advice of any kind.
Exactly. It's just been absolutely insane to see some of the gains that people have been able to realize by kind of catching them on this short squeeze.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think the last thing anyone here wants to see is like total market collapse and destabilization. No. We don't want to go back into another recession out of something like this.
Or quite frankly, a depression, because the last time the stock market truly destabilized in a huge way, the Great Depression happened. So we need to be careful. But the big issue here, and the thing that I want everyone to take away from this, is not that, is not meme stocks, is not that retail traders are bad, because they're not. Everyone should have access to making money. Everyone should have access in investing in the stock market. But the thing that I want to come out of this is all of the damage that Reagan economics did in the 80s and all of the deregulation that Alan Greenspan advocated for and eventually ended up enacting to make this possible, because this kind of thing should not be possible. It just shouldn't be.
I remember my dad reading Greenspan's book when he published it, talking about how credit default swaps were the greatest thing that have ever been invented.
Oh, God.
And this was like
that guy was a monster.
Slightly before everything went to hell in 2008,
Yeah.
So it was just kind of like, ew.
And a lot of us are scarred from that. Like I was graduating university into a recession, even in Canada. Because obviously it was a global recession that happened because the financial products that these risky investment bankers were making, like betting against people and betting against their mortgages and selling off debt to foreign countries, like it affected a lot of the world's economy, including my home countries. So I graduated into a recession.
Yeah, I feel like there's an entire generation that kind of had to carry that baggage. You know what I mean? Like, I think I got somewhat lucky when I graduated because I went back to school for grad school. So I ended up coming out of school around 2014. It was just starting to uptick again.
Yeah.
But the problem was, again, because everybody goes back to school during a recession type situation.
Yep.
There's still too many of us coming out, so. And I mean, that's a whole other ball of wax that I'm not even going to get into on this podcast.
Yeah, this is
whether or not
that's a conversation about post-secondary education that I'd be glad to have with you, but not here.
Yeah, that's its entire other ball of wax, because that's something I've realized the more I've kind of like progressed in my career is that, well, when you're not graduating from, let's say, the top 50 schools, did you really graduate? In a lot of ways is how most jobs are going to look at you. And I mean,
especially in the United States. Yeah. Absolutely. Post-secondary education in Canada is important, but a lot of it's public. Yeah. So, like we have some private schools, but a lot of them are art schools, like the Vancouver Film School, where you're going to go spend tens of thousands of dollars on tuition there. But if you go, I don't know, just up the street to Simon Fraser University, you're not going to pay that much.
Well, that's what I was about to follow up with. I was lucky. I went to UF, which is one of the best public schools in the country, not private. And without that, I probably still would be in debt, but I'm lucky because I've been able to get rid of my student loans.
Yeah. And I feel the same way. And also, just so that we're super clear, that whole wealth redistribution thing also applies to student loans. Cancel student loan debt. I don't care that I don't have any.
I do. And I care.
Yeah, absolutely. Like we got to take care of each other, friends. We got to take care of each other.
I just think it's interesting with all that's gone down, though, is this conversation that we've always had throughout the years, which is what are the rules? And when we discover now that when the rules start to get disrupted, it's like, well, you guys are breaking the rules all the time. We talk about it all the time. But now that the average person is now playing the same game, it's an issue. And that's a problem. Like you said, talking about like we figured out the system, but it's like we've been talking about people bastardizing the system for forever, and it's like, why is it
Many
now
years.
an issue? And it's like because the average person has figured out the game, but why is that the problem?
It's the min-maxing, right?
Yeah.
Like all of us nerds and us gamers have been min-maxing our RPG characters since forever ago. And you know, the conversation has often been, man, when nerds when us nerds and us gamers figure out how to min-max things like our education and finances and everything like that, it's going to level the playing field. And that's what this was supposed to do, is just level the playing field. But it didn't start off as like this altruistic thing where it was like, you know, eat the wealthy or whatever. It was very much so a haha meme stocks. And, you know, I'm going to go make a bunch of money. And like, fine. But it wasn't altruism that started this. It is altruism that might come of it, which I would be so happy with. That's not how we started.
I think the joke that I keep seeing that I love the most is that obviously this time, that was a couple months ago, but this time last year, Animal Crossing came out and then they introduced the stock market. And so kids spent 10 months figuring out how to value their turnips, and you know, a year later, here we go, they're disrupting the actual stock market. So
you know, we laughed about it last March. We're like, oh, these kids and their turnips. I tag yourself, it was me. I was
flying island to island. I wanted the best deal for my turnips.
I did too.
Well,
I had like
that
spreadsheets.
website, man,
the website changed the game.
Absolutely, that website was like, it was amazing.
This is again talking about like the system. The website established that like just different people had different, like insanely different prices, and so it made this like, if you didn't have that website, you would have never known that you could have gotten quadruple the price. I was happy when I saw like 5 and 10 price range. And then you're seeing them for like 300 more, and you're like, wait a second, that's possible. And so it's a system you never would have known about, but somebody had to figure it out. So
yeah. And I like that was kind of this primer for like, I wonder if we could do this, but in real life.
Yeah, it's great.
Which is like, I want that. I want everyone to be able to go out and make their own money and to not feel bad about it, and for wealth distribution to be equal and for everyone to have access to the things that they need. Like, I feel that deeply. I really do. I'm from British Columbia, which is deeply democratic socialist. And that's just kind of the way I was raised. Is we take care of each other. And part of that is making sure that everybody has what they need in order to live. So I am here for wealth redistribution, but I really hope that what comes out of this whole GameStonk thing is that there's more regulation, because those hedge funds have been running rampant for years, and this exposes a major problem with the system, and I hope that it gets fixed. I really do.
Just establish the rules. It's all you got to do, is just these are the rules, and just
here are the rules. Don't break them.
Yeah.
That kind of touches on a question we have in chat, which is just, do you think that this could hurt companies like GameStop if the shorters can find a way to influence the market and make the company theoretically fail, or if they can make their money back, you know?
Well, I don't see that. I don't know. I think that so GameStop actually is going to be reporting on its financials, its quarterly financials, relatively soon. And they're going to be closing up and going into their quiet period, I think, next week. So it's tough to say. I mean, follow me on Twitter and ask me that question after GameStop reports. And we'll keep an eye on it and let you know. I don't think that shorters could have that much of an influence, but artificially inflating the stock is also bad, because remember that there are a lot of people that are also betting on the long-term health of GameStop or AMC or BlackBerry or, whatever the heck it is that is the meme stock of the hour. So, that also affects the long-term investors and the people that are long on GameStop as opposed to being short on GameStop.
Well, and that's kind of what's happened, is we've basically detached ourselves from any kind of fundamentals whatsoever. At this point, GameStop is being treated very similar to something like Bitcoin, where it's just like, it's always going to go up because we make it go up, and that's not necessarily true,
Yeah.
And it brings up the issue, you're kind of saying this too, about, you're saying about the longevity of GameStop, which in this era that we're in now, something like GameStop probably wouldn't continue, so... But now you have this conversation of providing value for a thing that technically is 100% going to fail after the game has been played. And I say that as in, it's no longer about a stock market investing in companies. It's about, can I make my money make money? And so you're not talking about the company anymore. You're just talking about making money. And that's an issue.
Yep.
So,
it's a huge issue because I mean, listen, GameStop sucks.
Yeah.
Like, let's call a spade a damn spade. GameStop sucks. And they treat their employees like garbage. And they do exploitative things with their internal marketing. And like, they do nonsense all the time. I am not a GameStop fan. And they're still a company that's full of people, because one of the things that that Mike and I actually always tell people is that business is about people. It's not about numbers. I mean, yeah, numbers are part of it, but numbers only tell a story. But the people are the reason why the story works and why the story exists at all. Yep. And that's something that's getting lost in translation, and that's getting lost in the shuffle of, the whole stonks conversation. Yep. Of just treating it like it's turnips. Well, it's not turnips, guys. Yep. Like, listen.
Well, and that's where something like Robinhood was succeeding. It was getting these people just putting their money in something that a comfort stock that they know might get them an extra $100, something like Nike or Amazon. They use the big names, but that's why Robinhood, I think, existed. They're like, these people are never going to actually use this to do anything. They're just going to buy $100 in stock and hope they make $150.
The crazy thing I've seen on Reddit or Twitter is a lot of people are talking about how GameStop was their free stock from Robinhood. Because at the time it was a $3 stock, and that's what they were doing, is they were giving away an intro stock that was a name that you might recognize, and GameStop was a perfect one to do.
It's totally true. And like, listen, the existence of services like Robinhood are so important for retail trading and for ensuring that the stock market can be accessible to people that didn't go to school for this, that aren't financial investment bankers, that don't have Bloomberg terminals at their desks every day, that they can look at this and they can do some research on, what's trending and what has good long-term health. And you can do this yourself. You don't need to have like a broad education. You just need to love spreadsheets. And yeah, like I love the fact that Robinhood exists. I don't love what they're doing today. I think that's real bad.
This should be the beginning of the end of them, right? Like, this is what they're built for. I mean, I think, John, you said they listed the regulation, but yeah, this is what they're for. And at some point in time,
for this,
they decided
democratization
to be like,
of finance.
Well,
it's supposed to be about like something they said, 5 years ago was let the people trade.
Yeah, that was it.
And
there's always a tweet for it.
There's always a tweet. There always, just like there used to always be an app for it. There's always a tweet.
Yep.
It's so important. And I just, man, I'm so mad at the stock market, and I'm so mad at finance bros that have made the stock market into this deregulated trash pile, and also power to the people at the same time.
Yeah, I think there needs to be some level of investigation into what's going on with Robinhood cutting access in particular.
I think that the SEC is going to have to get involved. There's no way around that.
Like, I mean, if you look at like CNBC yesterday, they were very, very, very heavily like pro hedge fund, anti retail trader. And you could see who their audience is, or who they care about, And the problem is
because they care about the people that have the deepest pockets. They don't care about the people in the middle.
Yeah. And with Robinhood, it seems to be that it's Citadel. It's not the user base,
Yeah.
And that's going to need to get looked at for sure. And we could talk about this for another 7 hours. So I'm going to kind of
we could talk about collusion.
Yeah.
And or at least the appearance thereof, because obviously it's not, because we can't prove anything, but it looks that way.
No, it definitely looks like it needs to get investigated. But let's talk a little bit about what you do on the side with F Squared.
Sure.
So can you tell us a little bit more about what that is?
So F Squared kind of started from this place of, hey, how can we help people? And that's actually where Virtual Economy started. Is we started it at the very beginning of the pandemic, because for Virtual Economy, we wanted to catalog what was happening. And we wanted to catalog the sentiments of the game industry at that time. And we figured the best way to do that was just to have, real conversations with people in the industry. And, it evolved into what it is today, but that's where we started. And F Squared was kind of the same way. Is we started up and we're like, okay, what if we started doing pro bono consulting? What if we started working with indie developers, with Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQIA developers. We started working with women in the industry, and then we started like expanding out and out and out and out. And that's where we started from. Is we wanted to do some good in the middle of a pandemic where GDC was canceled, that we figured E3 was going to be canceled, we figured PAX was going to be canceled, and we knew that networking was going to be a big problem. So we figured the best thing that we could do was open ourselves up and say, we have a ton of background in this industry. We know a lot of people. We were doing introductions, we were helping people with pitch decks. And today, F Squared is, we're really focused on helping developers all the way through their development process. So they'll send us an early build, we'll send back feedback, for a number of different things. We will send feedback for accessibility, we'll get diversity and inclusion consultants involved. We make sure that when we do have subcontractors for things like mock reviews, that we're contracting to people that come from all different walks of life so that we can have a diverse range of perspectives about a diverse range of potential issues within some of these games. So that's the paid work. And then we've kept doing the pro bono stuff. We love hanging out with indie devs, and we don't ask a penny for it. We just want to help.
Mm-hmm. No, I think that's a lot of what even got me wanting to even go to law school to begin with, was being able to kind of help indie devs. Because I was writing about indie devs for forever. And that's how I even met Mike. Is I was running a site called XBLA Fans at the time then.
I remember.
XBLA was huge back in the day before everything kind of switched to Steam and Microsoft kind of botched their Xbox One kind of launch,
True.
But I was just talking to indie devs all the time, and they'd show me contracts, and I'd be like, I'm not an attorney, right? I'm just in law school. They're like, yeah, but we don't know any attorneys. And I'm like,
yeah,
that's a problem.
It's a huge problem. That's the other thing that we do. We try to hook indies up with great attorneys, and we have lawyer friends all over the world, especially in major economies, that work in the game industry that can help with things like contract law, and they can help with things like IP and make sure that you're getting a good deal. And so like Mike and I will help you look at terms, but then we'll go and like filter you off to a lawyer who can help with the nitty gritty stuff, because obviously at the end of the day, Mike and I are not lawyers.
Yeah, no, it's always nice to have like a basic term sheet, that has like, here's what the deal should be. Now let's get into the nitty gritty on like how that actually is brought about.
Yes.
And that's a lot of what I end up doing. Is a lot of times I'll have to negotiate both sides of that, for people, and explain, here's what you should get in the term sheet part, and here's what you should get in the actual contract.
Right.
But like oftentimes I have deals like that where, they've already kind of done that, whether it's through, somebody who has 30 years industry experience who just knows what stuff should be,
totally,
or whatever else, and it's always good to see on my end whenever people advice, and I mean, I was just talking about this with somebody else the other day in HR, and it's just like HR, accounting, legal, they need to be line items on your budget, because at the end of the day, you don't know what you don't know. And you're
absolutely
just going to get into trouble, especially as you scale. And the crazy part is, especially for very small companies who are just looking for some help, there's plenty of people out there who are willing to give a little bit of free advice or free consulting.
Absolutely.
You just really need to reach out more than anything, especially if you're just blunt about it. And you sit back and say, here's what my situation is. Is there any way you can help me with something?
And more often than not,
you get a good response than if you try to lowball the person and just sit back and be like, well, I'll pay you $50 for that. It's like,
right.
No.
Yeah, no. My thing since the beginning of when I got into business in like 2009 is I'd rather work for free than work for cheap. And so that's why we do the pro bono consulting, because it's just like, they can't afford us for our actual rate. Like, that's not cool. And also, I just like giving away stuff. I just like leading with generosity. It's just so important. It's such an important part of doing good business, is making sure that you give away enough to make sure that, people know that you're there, that you care. Right.
And that's a lot of what even kind of what brought me and John together was there's a lot of conversations with esports players of, I'm talking directly to somebody who, there's a lot of stuff in between us that I shouldn't be talking directly to this young person about, and I am. And then through that, I started to be like, well, that's a problem. Like, I shouldn't just be walking up to an 18-year-old kid and being like, you're going to be on my team and I'm going to own whatever. There needs to be some structure to that. And then in that, then, me and I talked to John, we started noticing just these bad contracts everywhere because these kids did not have just somebody in the middle to be like, look, this is what this system needs to be a little bit more, it shouldn't just be about a young person discovering the rest of their life and signing their life away for 10 years. And, it's something me and John talk about all the time is like, there has to be a restructuring of how we approach these young esports athletes because right now it's just being kind of exploited. Yeah. Again, it takes people who are willing to just be like, okay, let's have at least one conversation for free so that you at least know the minimal of what you need to know before you talk to somebody on a team,
Yeah. And esports is probably the area that I see a lot of the worst contracts.
For sure.
You also see it a lot, sadly, with students, especially foreign students. People will just assume that they'll do the work and they'll get locked into this deal and they'll end up working for $10 an hour, and then some guy owns the IP that they didn't even know was involved.
Yeah, exactly.
And suddenly there's just this person that they've never talked to who is in charge, and they're like, what? But the problem is they signed a deal without having someone read it. They may not even be able to read it because it might not even be in their language,
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate to see that kind of stuff, and
it's preventable.
Painful for me. Yeah.
It's crazy when you see a contract for someone. I'm using an example, like seeing somebody's first contract they've ever been presented because they're doing well in a specific game. And that first contract saying everything this person gets from here on out belongs back to these people. So you're like, the first contract this young person gets is literally these people get something from him for the rest of his life. No, that should not be a thing. But they try to pull it off.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who try to put in like some kind of perpetuity clause where
perpetuity clauses are so gross
in there where they're like, well, if we make an introduction, we own that forever.
Yeah.
And the problem is just think about like really low-hanging introductions that exist.
Mm-hmm.
There's plenty of brands out there that do like affiliate deals, for example. You could direct contact them. You don't need a quote unquote agent or something to do that. So if that person's just doing that and then taking a percentage of that sucks.
And then trying to hide that they are acting as an agent instead of a manager, and then trying to hide in the using the contract to hide that. It's crazy.
That's so gross and so exploitative.
But that's the problem with esports because we know we love that the talent is in the youth. But the problem is that we don't have anything to protect the youth at this point.
We need to protect the youth.
Yeah, 100%.
Streamers, esports, whatever you want to describe it, that entire group gets exploited by that concept of agent management type stuff that 100%. Isn't registered as an agent or a manager. It often is violating California law, No,
I understand. And like Mike and I are part of this stream team now, and that's part of what we bring in terms of, what is it that we bring to the table? Well, we're a lot older than a lot of these other streamers that are in their 20s. Mike's in his 40s and I'm in my mid 30s. And what we do is we just make sure that no one is making bad deals, that everyone has introductions where they need them, and that no one is working themselves to death. Stream mom and dad. That's what we do.
That's great. I mean, again, it's like, it's good to know that there is just people that exist like that, because it gets hard fast when you feel like everybody's just out to kind of grab a little bit of you.
Right. Especially when you're so talented.
Yes, exactly.
And for someone from like my perspective, that's what makes it frustrating, is because for a lot of these people, they just see people reaching in and being like, I need part of that pie. They get very nervous whenever you say like, I need money for this, and the reality is, for something like legal, accounting, whatever else, takes time. It takes a degree. It takes a lot of experience. Typically you need to charge for that unless you're doing it pro bono because there's a reason to do it pro bono,
Right.
And that makes it hard sometimes for some of these guys because they're not used to needing to know that,
Well, they're young. A lot of them are so young. They don't know what they don't know. And it's taken, like, I like to say that I have a street MBA that I have earned over the many years that I have done business. But I didn't go to school for this, right? This is all stuff I've had to learn through crashing and burning and getting hurt and doing bad deals and getting bad terms on the work I used to do in web, especially, and quite frankly, sometimes as a writer. But if I can, so like part of what Mike and I do is we try to make sure that people are not making kind of the same mistakes that I've made, or, you know, mistakes that Mike has seen over and over again. We want to make sure that people have access, like especially indie developers. And now on our stream team, you know, the streamers that we know have access to people and resources that are there for them and actually care about them as human beings instead of just caring about them as products.
It's interesting too, because again, we were talking about esports, streaming, all that kind of stuff. We're talking about how the young people don't have a clue, but like, you know, you also have a younger person being represented by a parent who doesn't have a clue.
True.
And
absolutely
it's very
true.
hard for them to really admit it because they're like, oh, my son or daughter is great at this game. I want them just to be recognized for it. But it's like, no, you need to be taking the same precautions as anybody is.
Well,
not, you know, so.
And that's where I have a really kind of unique, kind of lucky situation there, is because like when I was 18, I had someone who wanted to fly me to E3 to write, and they were going to pay me for it, you know? And I remember showing that to my mom, and she was like paranoid that I was like going to get kidnapped.
Oh, totally.
To like some Middle Eastern country and kidnapped or something, you know? And I was just like, no, it's a real job. She's like, I don't know that, you know? She's like, I want to see a contract. And then we sent it to my uncle.
Reasonable.
My uncle was kind of like a commercial real estate kind of attorney, you know? So, I mean, he knows stuff. He doesn't know esports and streaming and writing about games necessarily, you know, because nobody did back in 2007, really. You know, that wasn't like that was a specialized industry yet, really, to the same extent it is now. So, I mean, he did infinitely better than the average person would. And that's always the thing I tell people is I'm like getting somebody is better than nothing, you know, even if you don't want to pay for somebody who actually works in your industry and knows everything, at least get somebody like a family friend or something.
Yeah.
That
someone that knows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, go ahead, I'm sorry.
No, go for it, Justin.
I would say the big thing that I was talking about, like with the parents thing too, getting in the middle of it, is where they decide as the parent that their kid is ready for the, I guess you could say, the limelight. And a lot of parents, I get asked a lot about like, you know, my kid's good at this. What should I do with him? The kid will be like 12 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old.
Let the kid be a kid.
That's 100% what I say. I'm like, do you even know this is what this kid's going to really love, say, in a year or two? I mean, how much a child changes from 14 to 17 is insane. So
can confirm.
Yeah,
I have an almost 17-year-old.
Exactly.
I know,
and
I feel like so much.
I know every parent wants the best for their kid, and they want to see that they're excelling at something. They think they're excelling at something, and it's like, just let them. That's why I feel like there needs to be, especially for esports, needs to be like a 17-year-old like age limit to professionally compete, because you have to let them decide. If this is really what they want to do by the time they're finished high school or their main schooling, you know, or main year. Because a 14-year-old, and this I don't like when I hear certain brand teams are recruiting at that age. I'm like, these are children. They don't know what they want.
They're babies. Like, I wouldn't let my babies do this. Like, I've got 4 children. Like, my youngest son is 9 and is incredible at gaming. Like, just incredible. There is no part of me that wants to say like, hey, Gabe, you want to make this into like a professional thing? Wouldn't that be cool? Absolutely not. Yeah. If my son comes to me when he's, you know, like 16, 17 and says, hey, you know, I'm thinking about this as a potential career choice, at least, you know, for like my 20s. What do you think about this? Then yeah, we can have that conversation. But it's not up to me as a parent to determine what my child does for money. Yeah. Like
and then
that's
they're competing against grown adults sometimes. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, you take a game, like there's a 16-year-old who's playing against a 24-year-old, and it's like they aren't even the same emotionally, you know, to put them in
not
the same
only
room.
that, a lot of times we still do gaming houses.
Gaming houses, you have children mixed with it's
in 8, 19.
I have a lot of feelings about gaming houses as it is. So many feelings, but they are so deeply not appropriate. Listen, there are specific for kids leagues out there that I think are fabulous. I think they're great. And I think that those are worth pursuing if you want your kid to make more friends, if you want them to have different social experiences, if you want them to be able to travel. And a lot of them have city leagues, which is super cool too. But beyond that, like, no, let your kid be a kid. You don't have to turn everything into a side hustle. Not everyone has to be a millennial.
Or
I think that's one of the worst things with our generation in particular.
Oh my gosh, it's
I feel
so
like
true.
you're not allowed to have a hobby anymore.
No,
That's true.
everything's
The
a
moment
hustle.
you start doing something, you're like, okay, like I'm ripping a lot of baseball cards. Now I got to start making money off it. It's like, well, shit, you know, that's basketball, by the way. I'm not oblivious. I just happened to grab a wrong stack.
But it's also,
yeah.
like, you know what I'm saying? We're having this push for, like, you know, gaming esports to be as big as it is. I understand that a lot of parents just don't, they both want their kids to make money off of this, but they also don't understand that, like, we don't even have it fully implemented at a school level. And not until I hear there's rumblings what they're doing for at least collegiate, but like not until Riot actually does what they can to provide the resources for schools to be like, if you want to have a program where you can learn, we will help you. Like that should be a whole, if we're trying to make esports a real thing, that needs to be across the board, starting from the bottom. Well, you know, like,
and I think that's one of the most interesting things that's being worked on by a lot of different companies that I'm aware of. The problem there becomes it's a legal quagmire.
It's too many. It needs. I hate
to be honest, because the thing is, okay, let's say you want to do an esports team at your high school or something. Well, first off, getting the equipment is not as easy as it sounds a lot of times to get good
it's really
computers to run stuff, to be able to get consoles or whatever else. Especially if we're talking about a less affluent school to begin with. And that's a ball of wax.
Which is a huge issue.
But then let's start talking about licensing when it comes to various different games. You know, you're now pulling from 9-10 different companies that all have rules about, they're all different too. That's the crazy part. Like on whether or not you're allowed to pay an entry fee, on whether you're allowed to, you know, market it, whether you're allowed to sell sponsorships, whether you're allowed to do this. You know, the rules get very complicated very fast, not to mention the fact that every single state has its own gambling rule, which you're largely starting to fall into skill contests the moment you have prizes and any consideration to enter. So it becomes like this absolute mess. And that's why.
And then we start talking about the international stuff. I mean, like in Canada, you know, like gambling is really, those rules are rigid. They're very rigid.
You know, Quebec is always the one.
British Columbia too is quite bad. Like my home province is really rigid about that kind of thing as well.
Yeah, and I mean, like most of that stuff, people just kind of do, just hoping they're small enough that it won't matter. You know, but the problem is that also keeps you small enough that you don't matter,
and you can't scale.
You can't scale. It's too much risk for me to dump in a couple $1 million on you if I don't know that you can get full compliance on it, you know, and there are companies that are, you know, going full compliance, going crazy amounts of VC money, and maybe they'll figure it out, but you never know. But you also,
but esports is also this huge bubble, right? Like there's so much money in esports, and there's not enough. There's not enough to say that there's going to be much return on investment, quite frankly, or any investment. I mean, we've seen the way things have gone in 2020 with esports, and like how challenging it is to make money when it's all virtual. Like it's just really hard.
That's one of the things I saw this week with everything going on with GameStop was a bunch of quotes from Mark Cuban, and some of them were on GameStop and retail investors, but some of them were actually on esports. And it was basically sitting back saying, esports is a terrible business model right now, you know, for someone trying to make money, you know, and that's why someone like him isn't involved in running a team, even though you do see so many different NBA teams or whatever else getting into and investing. You know, others are looking at it from a risk perspective of like, how do you actually make money?
Well, and that's the thing, is that there's a pretty clear line in how to make money in sports. There isn't that clear of a line in esports, because a lot of it relies on heftier content creation, which requires more money, which requires more investment. And it's just, where does it stop?
And I get weird. We're not even mentioning the fact that a lot of the pro teams are given stadiums, you know?
Well, yes, that's true.
That's our own ball of wax again to kind of just dive into, you know?
But I think it's a weird thing that, again, esports is really, it's already been around overseas, but even over here, it's starting to get that real gambling push for gaming esports with gambling. But it's like, we have established in all of 2020 that like cheating is bad and it's rampant
Cheating
through all
bad.
of gaming, you know? Like, it's really bad. And so it's like, I don't understand how gambling is making a come up when we have whole tournaments that are, in the end, you're like, did they really do that well? Like, we don't know anymore. Like, it's easy to get away with it now. So that's why I'm like,
What a
it's
nightmare.
just, it's so, we talk about the Wild West as a phrase that gets used a lot, but it's like
But it kind of is.
It is, but it's like, that's what I'm saying. Is like, you have literally no real way to know how it's going to go. There's no way to know where the money's going to come from. There's no way to know who's going to be successful, because everything is just like, you know what I mean? There's a lot of hands up, like, well, we'll see. You know what I mean? So,
well, and we kind of walked into a perfect segue for kind of the last thing I kind of want to talk about today. And I want to make sure I phrase this right, because I'm not trying to get you to speak on behalf of everyone who's a mother, but more on behalf of somebody who writes about games from a parent's perspective to parents, you know? So I'd like to just kind of like get some feedback from you on, what do you think parents should be doing when it comes to their kids' gaming habits, and what should they be more aware of?
So the best thing you can do for your kids' gaming habit is be involved. And not just be involved in a, Tommy, what have you been playing today? But actually sit with them and learn. And I've written, my piece for the ESRB hasn't gone up yet, but I actually wrote about screen time, and I've written about a lot of this stuff, both for Super Parent and for the ESRB, about better ways to help your kids make good content decisions. And all of it involves extensive communication and getting involved and understanding, my two youngest are very into Minecraft, and it's like sitting with them. Who are they playing with?
Mm-hmm.
And what are they doing? What are they most interested in? Like my tiny one, Vivi, is very interested in just rescuing animals. Vivi loves rescuing animals and like bringing them back to her little settlement and raising animals. Like that's her favorite thing to do. And Gabriel is
Time Rancher.
No, I need to get her into that. She'd probably love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, she would probably.
That's the entirety of that game is just.
No, it's true. I think I have that on PlayStation now that I think about it. I might need to do that. But like, yeah, she's very into that. And Gabe is very into, designing. He loves designing new ways to interact with spaces and like contraptions and things like that. And he and his friends are constantly building like these interconnected communities and trading and figuring out their own economies. Like they're dealing in microeconomics without actually knowing anything about microeconomics, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. Like I'm so encouraging of this.
That's one of the coolest things to me about games in general, is just the fact that you can learn a lot more than you realize.
Oh, totally.
Playing something like Civ, or even trying to
resource management, I think
deal with resource management and anything. Yeah. I mean, honestly, I probably forced myself to get really good at math from playing something like League of Legends, even just from just trying to do it in my head and sitting back and be like, all right, so my damage is X and his has a mitigation of, 20%, and then I have piercing like whatever of another 15%, and then if you add in this extra thing, it gives me 0.1% of this, and then it just kind of goes through and you're like, do I have enough to kill him? It's like, yeah. And you have to make those decisions quickly, and yes, some of it is just pure reflexes, and you start to just get a good read on it, kind of like a game like chess,
muscle memory,
where you've played the same game of chess every time.
Sure.
To a certain point. There's only a certain point where it eventually changes, but even then it's just like, you got to learn that stuff, And
then they grow up to play EVE Online and they can run a whole corporation. They don't even realize it.
Honestly, that probably is like its own NBA. Like when you say street NBA, that is pretty close
for sure.
Yeah, that is very, very close. Yep. So that's the first thing that parents can do to like really get interested, is like learn about how your kids are playing games. Mm-hmm. And get involved with their playtime. And the other thing is listen to them when they talk about their games. Don't just like brush it aside and be like, I don't have any interest in this. Ask questions, be interested. And that means that when something potentially backwards happens, or things kind of go off the rails socially, or somebody comes into a server or into a chat room, or into, if they are playing like hero-based shooters like Overwatch, if somebody comes in and is abusive, that they feel comfortable enough coming to you and saying like, hey, this happened and I'm kind of freaked out about it and I really don't know what to do, that you'll always have their back. And that's really what kids want at like any age, going all the way up to, you know, my eldest daughter's age, and she's almost 17. They just want to know that you care enough that you will have their back if they need you.
Yeah. Makes sense. I know one thing, and again, we kind of touched on influencers a little bit earlier. One thing that's always super interesting to me is just, do parents even know who their kids are watching or listening to, and what kind of ideas that person is spouting back at them?
Yeah. And more often than not, a lot of parents, they don't have time and they don't have the resources and they don't know what they don't know about, you know, what their kids are doing online. And only to a certain extent can you be monitoring your kids and like micromanaging them. The best thing that you can do is have conversations about conduct and have an internal code of conduct for your house about how it is that you want your children to be interacting online. Like, heck, when we all started on the internet back in the 90s, we had netiquette. That was like the thing that taught us how to be good citizens on the internet, right? Yeah, you all remember it. You all remember netiquette. You all remember, like, I know what's up here.
Yeah.
I remember netiquette. And my dad is a tech. Like, he's a tech guy. He's a server admin. So like I grew up having all of this knowledge. So I was really, really lucky. But so many of my friends and their parents, like, they just didn't know. And they didn't know what they didn't know. So be curious, have a social code of conduct for your house, check in with your kids to make sure that they know that you care about them and you care about their hobbies, just like you would do with like them playing soccer or going to dance class. You know, gaming is the same kind of thing. It's a great hobby and it's going to teach them so many different things that they won't even know until they get older. Right? So, and paying attention to who they're watching and interacting with is all part of that social code of conduct. Like, we don't allow, we say in our house to always lead with kindness. Like, that is how we govern all of our parenting decisions, you know, between the 4 parents that are in this house and all 4 of our children, is always lead with kindness. And kindness sometimes means that you have to set very firm boundaries. And it means that talking about things like, no, what happened here was racist, or no, what happened here was actually misogynist, or this is ableist, or what have you, but making sure to have those conversations about that too, because that will help your kids to make good choices around that kind of content, because kids don't know what they don't know. Don't let streamers raise your kids. Don't do it.
I know it's always tempting to just kind of like give them an iPad and like put something on YouTube.
Oh, totally. But like, give them an iPad and give them Netflix.
Yeah.
Or Disney Plus, because that's regulated. And that's something I wrote about over at Super Parent, is YouTube is yeah, YouTube is not a good place for children. Even YouTube Kids, like, if we talk about that algorithm and just how addicting it is, you know, no. Just like if you need to give your kids something to do and you are tearing your hair out because we're in the middle of a global pandemic and everything is bad all the time and you just need 10 minutes to yourself or 30 minutes to yourself, give your kid Netflix, give your kid Disney Plus or Hulu or whatever, but make sure it is regulated content. Don't let them go to places where the content isn't really regulated.
Yeah, I get the thing with YouTube, because I don't think parents realize one wrong video and their kid's going to keep getting sent videos like that video. Like, all the kid's got to do is watch one video that's not something he should be watching. And YouTube's going to be like, oh, you watched all of this video. Here's more.
You should watch more.
Yeah, and I don't think a lot of parents understand that about YouTube. Yeah. They think they're just like, oh, they watch cartoons. Cartoons is all they're ever going to see. And it's like,
that's not necessarily the case.
You stumble across one bad
Suddenly
video.
You go from Mickey Mouse to like crazy stuff, you know?
To horror.
Yeah.
In some cases, like I don't say any of this to be like a paragon of parenting, because my goodness, I have made so many mistakes as a parent. And one of those mistakes was actually letting the kids watch YouTube when they were small. And because I was like, oh, what's the harm? It's YouTube Kids. Like, they're just watching like cute little pieces of content.
Yep.
No. No, I was very wrong. So now we have like a no YouTube policy unless you're going to learn something.
Yeah.
In our house. Like, I mean, with the little ones anyway. It's a little bit different for my 2 older children, but for my babies, There's a no YouTube policy unless you're learning stuff.
Yeah.
Makes sense. I think that's a good spot to kind of wrap things up. Amanda, for anybody who wants to follow you after the show, where can they kind of find your work?
So you can find me if you go to my personal website, which is amandafarough.com. I'm also on Twitter. My Twitter is currently locked down because
I saw that earlier.
Yeah, so that's still follow me anyway. I still get follow requests. I will unlock it probably tomorrow or the next day because reasons. If you want to listen to the Virtual Economy podcast, you can go to virtualeconcast.com. That has all 67 of our episodes, including our 0th episode, which was just the dumbest idea. Just so stupid. 0 arrays, very helpful in code. 0 arrays, very stupid with podcast episodes. Just dumb. But yeah, you can find our podcast there. And then I stream 3 days a week, Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday at twitch.tv/readyplayermama.
Right on. Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. This has been an awesome discussion.
This has been really fun.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, I very much appreciate you joining us.
I'm very glad. I'm so thrilled that you all asked me to come and talk about the things that I love so much, including, parenting and video games and stonks. Apparently, I like stonks now. I don't even know.
All about the stonks.
I don't even. Who am I?
Can we bring this thing full circle before we finish? So, obviously your F² thing's a great idea. F².biz. But to bring this all full circle, I love that at the bottom where you can contact, it says, how can we help? What are you looking to talk to us about? And the already filled in quote is the price of turnips on your Animal Crossing island.
So I made that website in April of last year, fantastic. And I have not updated it since then.
I love it.
But yes, Mike and I are very, very fun. We are very fun to work with, and you should hang out with us. And yeah, you can go to f².biz if you are an indie developer and you are in need of assistance. Or if you're not an indie developer and you want, things like mock reviews and mock previews or just straight up consulting, like we're here for you.
Love it.
Awesome. All right. Later, everyone. And appreciate it.
All right. Bye.